Dear friends, welcome back to another episode of The Informant. In today's video, we'll dive into the rising tensions between Egypt and Ethiopia, where water, or the lack thereof, is at the center of the conflict. But before we get started, make sure you're subscribed to the channel with notifications turned on. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Tensions between Egypt and Ethiopia have increased further after Cairo signed a defense pact with Mogadishu, and now Egypt is making moves to send troops, weapons, and ammunition to Somalia. The two countries are also planning to hold joint military exercises, including with ground, air, and naval forces. The partnership between Egypt and Somalia has angered Ethiopia, which is already at odds with Egypt over Addis Ababa's construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD, which threatens to interfere with water and irrigation supply downstream in Egypt. While Ethiopia is moving ahead with the project in order to generate much-needed electricity, Cairo is understandably concerned with the impact that the dam could have on its population of 106 million people, which is dependent on the Nile River for nearly all of its freshwater needs. At risk, say the Egyptians, are its food supply and hundreds of thousands who rely on agriculture for jobs and basic sustenance. Egypt recently wrote a letter to the United Nations Security Council, protesting what it labeled as Ethiopia's pursuit of unilateral policies on the GERD project. Historically, many of the world's greatest conflicts have been driven by the control of vital natural resources. In the 20th century, European imperialism saw powers like Germany, the United Kingdom, France, Belgium, and Italy vying for control over the vast, resource-rich territories of Africa, contributing to the outbreak of World War I in 1914. The thirst and greed for resources also fueled Japan's invasion of China in 1932, escalating in 1937 with a brutal and large-scale invasion that lasted until 1945. Japan's expansion in 1941, attacking Pearl Harbor and dozens of other targets in the Pacific, was largely motivated by the need for essential raw materials for its industry, particularly oil. The quest for control of vital natural resources was also a significant factor that led to World War II, with Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939 as the first step in a relentless plan to expand eastward into Europe, seeking resources such as land, oil, and slaves. In the latter half of the 20th century, the control of natural resources also triggered wars like Saddam Hussein's Iraq invading Iran in 1980 for oil-rich regions, leading to a disastrous 8-year war, and Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990, again for its oil reserves. However, beyond oil, water, a fundamental resource, has increasingly become a source of conflict, especially in Africa, the driest continent in the world. The Nile, one of the longest rivers in the world, runs through 10 countries, each of which is eager to control or at least access its freshwater, which is vital for survival on the continent. Therefore, when one of these African nations makes a significant move in this direction, the response from the others is swift. This is exactly what happened when Ethiopia built a massive dam on the Nile, near the Sudanese border. Known as the Millennium Dam, it created a lake with a surface area of almost 1,900 kilometers. This dam, located in the Upper Nile, drew heavy criticism from Egypt, which depends on the Nile for 90% of its irrigation and human and animal consumption. Egyptians argue that the construction of such a large dam will dangerously reduce the river's flow. Despite Egypt's protests, Ethiopia proceeded and inaugurated the dam in 2020, leading to a diplomatic standoff between the two countries with implications in several areas, including military. For millennia, Egypt has been one of the most densely populated regions, thanks to its agricultural power, providing 1/3 of the wheat for the Roman Empire. Even today, 97% of Egypt's water supply comes from the Nile, making the river not only a lifeline but an existential necessity. With 95% of its population living along the Nile, any threat to its flow is seen as a threat to Egypt's very existence. The Nile, with its tributaries, the White Nile and Blue Nile, has been the lifeblood of Egyptian agriculture, transforming Egypt into one of the largest wheat producers of the ancient world. However, The construction of Ethiopia's Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD, threatens this balance, potentially reducing water flow to Egypt and impacting its economy and food security. Recently, Egypt announced the deployment of 10,000 soldiers to Somalia, Ethiopia's arch-rival. This move comes in the context of Ethiopia's agreement with Somaliland, a separatist region of Somalia, aiming to give Ethiopia access to the sea, which Somalia sees as a direct act of aggression by Ethiopia, heightening tensions and bringing the two countries closer to war. Egypt's deployment of troops is clearly a retaliation for Ethiopia's actions concerning the dam, a move that Ethiopia has fiercely criticized. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed stated that any foreign military presence in Somalia would be seen as an act of aggression, potentially leading to conflict. A more pronounced rift between Egypt and Ethiopia over Somalia would further destabilize an already volatile region. The ongoing war in Sudan has led to mass displacement throughout East Africa, with more than 2 million Sudanese fleeing the country. The continued fallout from the attacks of October 7th, Israel's response, and the ebb and flow of attacks by Iran's so-called axis of resistance means that attacks by the Houthi movement in the Red Sea have spiked, while Egypt has suffered from declining revenues typically generated by the Suez Canal, the body of water linking the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. Egypt hopes that its naval partnership with Somalia may help to stabilize actions in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. While most analysts focusing on great power competition assess the means and motives of countries like China, Russia, and the United States, the phenomenon is also playing out at a regional level, with second-tier or middle powers like Turkey, Egypt, and smaller Gulf countries flexing their muscle and working through proxies to recalibrate the balance of power in countries like Sudan, Libya, Somalia, and elsewhere. As the United States remains focused on supporting Ukraine in its war against Russia and working to mediate the ongoing tensions related to Israel's war with Hamas, other regions of the world are being afforded less bandwidth, which opens the door to regional actors meddling in weaker countries, often perpetuating conflict rather than playing a stabilizing role. Thus, over water, Africa faces the risk of a new, potentially devastating, larger conflict. As Ethiopia continues to unilaterally fill the GERD reservoir and possibly build more dams in the future, and with Egypt remaining a fragile and water-insecure state, the risk of a major military escalation in the Nile Basin is rising rapidly. If you value independent journalism and want to support our work, consider buying us a coffee through the QR code on the screen. Your contribution is essential for us to continue bringing quality analysis and information. Stay tuned for more updates, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for the latest analyses and insights on the world's most urgent geopolitical issues.
በታሪካችን በሙሉ ግን ሊነኩን የመጡ ከቅርብም ከሩቅም አሳፍረን መመለስ ደግሞ ተግባራችን ማንነታችንና መለያችን ነው። አንነካም፣ ከመጡብን ግን ማንንም በኢትዮጵያ ሉዓላዊነትና ክብር አንደራደርም። ሁለተኛው ወደ ውጭ የምንሄደው ወንድሞቻችን ሲቸግራቸው፣ ሰላም ሲፈልጉ፣ የኛን የሙያ ድጋፍ ሲፈልጉ በአፍሪካ ብቻ ሳይሆን ከአፍሪካ ውጭም ባሉ ሀገራት ችግር በገጠመ ጊዜ ሄደን መስዋዕትና ለመላው የሰው ዘር ሰላም፣ ለመላው የሰው ዘር